75, and since the age of 20 he's been a brahmachari monk in the ISKCON movement, and he has been serving the movement in many different capacities over the last several years. Nearly 20 years now he's been serving this movement. So he used to be the temple president in San Diego for several years. He's now handed over the responsibility to someone else, but he's built a wonderful congregation there. And he's also the editor of a magazine called 16 Rounds to Samadhi, which basically propagates bhakti and Krishna consciousness. And he's also in charge of Bhakti Lounge, where he tries to introduce new devotees to the process of Krishna consciousness. We're very fortunate to have him here. We hope in the future we don't have to introduce him as a guest speaker, but that he moves to Sacramento permanently. So there's that hope, and we are trying to invite him here. Let's hope for the best, and so we're very happy to welcome him here today. Hare Krishna.
Is there a harmonium in the house?
I'm sorry?
Do we have a harmonium? We have.
Prabhu, you bring your own, so I did not bring it today. I said.
Yeah, this time I didn't bring mine. Where's your brother?
He's at home. We're remodeling our home.
But he lives here, right?
Yes, just about half an hour away.
Okay. Well, send him my regards.
He says hello.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Krishna Krishna, Krishna Krishna. He probably went to his car, right?
Yeah, he's on his car.
Hope his car is close by. Oh, there he is.
It's Paradev Prabhu.
Oh, right. Does it need locking from the front?
No.
Jaya Giri
Put these aside. harmonia. Mirandasya Jananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasma Shri Gurave Namaha Panchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyeva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta-vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Akam Karati Vachalam Pangum Langate Kiram Yaskripātamaham Bande Shri Gurum Dīnataranam. So the title of tonight's presentation is Vedic Roots of Western Religions. It's just right. I don't know if it goes farther up then it covers my face. It's just perfect. Yeah. Even a little longer. So what are Western religions? Yes. Yeah.
What's the question?
What are Western religions?
Christians.
Christianity and
Salvationism.
and
Salvationism.
Salvationism.
Scientology.
Christian Orthodoxy also.
Yeah, that's included within Christianity. What are you saying back then?
Catholicism?
That's included within Christianity. You don't get a cookie. Yeah.
How west? Like west from India? Or
No, this is a technical term.
Oh, okay.
Come on, man, sit nice.
Sit like this.
No, it's fine. You're good. You want one of these?
No,
We're missing one more tradition.
not Islam.
Islam. Yeah, Islam. So these are technically called Western religions. Why do they call Western religions? This is a technical term, Western religions. There are different reasons for which they call Western religions, but that doesn't really matter at this point. They all have same origin. They all came from the same place, from the same book. Actually not completely the same book, but at least one section of the book, which is found in the Old Testament, or sometimes known also as the Jewish Bible. And in the Bible you have descendants of Abraham, and so one of his sons started the Jewish tradition, which later on grew into Christianity, and the other son of his started Islam. So that's quickly the story of that. Now, what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to refer to a work by a scholar named Suhotra Swami. His Holiness Suhotra Swami. He was a Srila Prabhupada's disciple. He passed away in a rather remarkable way in Sridhar Mayapur, which is a holy place. He left this world as he was chanting Hare Krishna on his japa like that, and they found him. He had a massive heart attack as he was chanting Hare Krishna. So it was the best way to go. He was a remarkable individual. Now, why am I saying this? Because not only within modern academic circles, but also in Vedic tradition, if you make a statement, if you don't have that statement epistemologically backed up, then you're making an epistemological mistake, which means basically, why should I trust you? And so one epistemological mistake is to make a statement without backing it by some kind of authority. And so in Vedic tradition, when a statement is made, then it's backed up by what is known as Vedic evidence. So one would make a statement, and then one would prove that statement by citing appropriate sections of the Vedic texts. And modern academia has a very similar system. If you make a statement, and even though that statement may not be intelligible to everyone, but if you back that statement by previous sage, professor, who has done research or who has built his or her research on the research of someone else, then this becomes credible. In other words, if someone's research or paper has been approved by the scientific community, then that paper becomes evidence, becomes truth. So similarly, in Vedic tradition, we do the same. If a certain rishi or a certain acharya, like whatever we here in ISKCON, whatever Srila Prabhupada says, we accept that as truth, because we take it that he has done the homework by backing that up by the statements of his own teacher and so on. And so what I'm about to present tonight is based on, I have learned from His Holiness Suhotra Swami, and it is based on the research work that Suhotra Swami has done. So basically, I cannot take credit for anything what I'm about to say, which is also Vedic way, right? The Western religions, the origin of Western religions is not completely clear. It is not completely clear, but it is. There are very powerful indicators that these religions originated in. Does anyone know? You're right, but I should have been more specific. I wasn't referring to a place, I was referring to a tradition.
Wait, repeat the question.
That these Western religions, for their origin, they have another tradition. Yes, Zoroastrianism. And anyone here heard of Zoroastrians? Okay, few. Okay. Good, all right. Now, Zoroastrian, I'm not going to go into details as to how people know this or why they assume this. Why would they make such statements? But that's a little bit beyond the scope of tonight's presentation. But the topic, the subject, the focus of this presentation is to make a connection between Zoroastrianism and Vedic culture. Literally Vedic culture. Now, Zoroastrianism flourished, started, and it expanded in what is nowadays known as Iran or Persia. That was the area where Zoroastrianism was spread. Now, it is, if you look on a map, Persia, well, I was going to say that Persia is a neighbor to India, and someone may object, well, excuse me, there's Pakistan there. But Pakistan used to be India. All of this used to be Hindustan, and then became Hindustan and Pakistan. But nevertheless, in bygone times, Persia was next door to India. And so there was a lot of influence of Persians onto Indians and Indian influence on Persians. Like, for example, what's the language of the Persians? Farsi. And, for example, we find that some of our Goswamis, in other words, the Acharyas, the big teachers in our line, such as the 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan, spoke Persian. They spoke Persian like that. Because there was so much communication between these two places. But the point is that Persia was next door to India. as a matter of fact, there's even a term, Indo-Iranian religions. Indo-Iranian, because there's some similarity here. And so Zoroastrianism, at least according to the academic data or research, started and expanded in Iran. And then later on, when the Islamic forces, if I should put it politely, marched onto this territory, they pushed these Zoroastrians out of this area, and then they scattered all over the world. And large numbers of these people actually went to India. And even nowadays in India, there are communities of Zoroastrians that came from those days. And they're still in India, and if you observe the rituals, many of the rituals are very similar to Vedic rituals. Like, for example, in Upanayanam, you have traditionally in India, in Vedic culture, in Vedic tradition, there is a ceremony where a boy at a certain age is offered Upanayanam, the Brahminical initiation. Very almost identical ceremony goes on in amongst these people, Zoroastrians. Now, something about Zoroastrianism to make the connection between Zoroastrianism and Vedic culture. Zoroastrianism was started by a person named Zarathustra. Actually, that's why Zoroastrianism came to be known by him. It was given name because of him. Now, it's interesting thing that in the Vedas, specifically in the Rig Veda, there's mention of Zarathustra. There's this. Here I should actually. What I'm going to do something different. Zoroastrians, they have their own scriptures. Catastrophe. I was once I was waiting in the line in Tirupati, waiting to see Balaji, and we were in the line for hours. There's this child and was crying as if somebody was killing it. I mean, it was really screaming, and it looked like complete child abuse. And then in one point, a woman that wasn't even the mom or anything, just like child was in the arms of its mom. And then another woman reached over, and she had something that made noise, and she just like shook it before the face of this child. The thing made a noise, and child was, oh. Stopped crying, took the thing, and everything was fine. But it all started what appeared to be like abnormal child abuse, not just child abuse, but terrible child abuse. That's how kids are. Everything's fine. So Zoroastrians, they also have their own Shastra. I'm not an expert in this tradition, but I know a little something. And one of them is called Zendavesta. Zendavesta. Now, just as you have mention of Zarathustra in the Rig Veda by the name of Jaruda, very same name is used in to refer to Zarathustra in the Zendavesta. So it's the same person that's referred to. And now this is interesting, that you have the father, so to speak, of this religion mentioned in the Rig Veda. And mind you, Rig Veda is way older than Zoroastrianism, at least certain sections of it. So he's mentioned in the Vedas, in the Rig Veda, and he's described to have been a devotee of Varuna Dev. Varuna is a demigod of water or liquids. And now the interesting thing about Varuna is that Varuna is a demigod, a deva. Okay, I think everyone's on. Do you know who devas are? No. Okay. Because because otherwise I'll explain, because I don't want to lose you. Devas, sometimes they're also known in English, Prabhupada would call them as demigods, or these divine beings that are put in charge of different universal affairs like that. And so they're literally divine beings in the sense that they're committed to God. There's something godly about them. First of all, they have immense powers, and second of all, they're devotees of God. They themselves are not God per se. They have many qualities of God. They're not God themselves, but they are devotees of God for the most part. And so Varuna is one of these devas. But the interesting thing about Varuna is that Varuna is the deity of asuras. And now asuras are sometimes in English translated as demons. And this is not precisely correct. It's not that it's incorrect, but it does not give a full picture. And this is definitely no mistake of the translator, because you cannot translate every single Sanskrit word into English by using just one word. It's just impossible. But yet, that's exactly what you have to do, unless you want to write a book every time you want to translate 2 or 3 words. You would get nowhere like this. So Prabhupada used the word demons. But to be very specific, they're not demons in a Christian sense of the term, or modern American sense of the term. When you think of a demon as some kind of a nasty creature that's there to kill little babies and whatnot, destroy people and nations, even though they may do that. But asuras are a specific clan, like a nation, a race of people. Just like you have African Americans, or you have Latinos, or you have Croatians, right? You have Russians. These are different races or nations, whichever way you want to call them. So similarly, asuras are a particular race, And I tell you, in Europe, because of all traditions, as you move from one country to another, you can tell how people are different. There are like very specific traits about different European countries, different European people. Like further south you go, down south you go, people become very loud. They love to sing, drink too. I guess they come together usually. They're very open like this, and then farther north you go, people become a little more conservative, a little more cold, I guess, according to the climate like this. And so similarly, asuras, it's not that asuras as a race, they have particular quality to them. And they as a race have a tendency to not be devotees of God. And they tend to be materialistically inclined. Just like, for example, Western and Eastern Europe. Nowadays there's hardly any difference, but like let's say 20 years ago, Western Europe was so much more materialistic. Due to the economic advancement, industrialization of Western Europe and so on. So there was a very prominent feature about Western Europe. And if you went to Western Europe and tried to teach some spiritual path, it was very difficult. I experienced it because Croatia's right smack in the middle between the two. And so, one country over, you're in Western Europe, one country over, you're deep in Eastern Europe. And so we would go here and there, and it was so difficult to get people to inspire people spiritually. It was very difficult to do that in the Western Europe. In Eastern Europe, smooth, very easy. Like we would put the rug down, start chanting Hare Krishna, and so many people would come. We would distribute books, we would give these neck beads, we would put tilak on everybody's forehead. In Western Europe, we would sing, no one would even pay attention. Complete difference. So similarly, asuras, this is a clan, this is a race of people that tend to be materialistic, but tend to be spiritually materialistic. It was a very interesting thing. So what you find with these people is that they will worship some kind of a deity, but for materialistic purposes, for some material goal. And you find a lot of these people in Bhakti Shastras or the scriptures of our Bhakti tradition. were Hiranyakashipu, right? I mean, Hiranyakashipu worshipped, who did he worship? Brahma, right?
Brahma.
Yeah. He worshipped, Brahma's a good guy, to put it in modern English terms. Brahma's a wonderful, pure, pious, good person, devotee of God. Yet he was being worshipped by Hiranyakashipu, who wanted what? He wanted immense powers. Why? So that he could feel strong, powerful, and superior to everyone else. Now this is very typical of Asuric clan, or of the Asuric race. So even though Varuna is a very good person, but somehow or other he was being worshipped, and still is, by the Asuras. So Asuras took Varuna as their own deity. And people often do this. They accept someone or something as their deity, even though the deity doesn't want that. How many of you have seen The Life of Brian by Monty Python? Life of Brian? No? Holy schmuck. They're comedians, so they'll make these funny little episodes about different things in life. So they made one fun episode about life of Jesus Christ. Not that they were mocking Jesus Christ, but they're mocking human nature. So what do you find in human nature? There's this bunch of people following this person who's trying to run away from them. But somehow or other they consider him to be Messiah. And he's running away from them. And then and he's trying to hide, and then eventually climbs up in the tree, and they're like, Messiah, Messiah. And he's like, I'm not a Messiah. And then eventually runs away, manages to run away from, run out of the tree, and away from the people, and in the process of which he drops two things. He drops one of his sandals, and I think he drops his water bottle. Not a bottle, because people previously didn't use bottles, they used like a bag, water bag, made out of animal skin. So he drops two items, and then people chanced upon it, they found it, and they say, Messiah has given a sign, it's the shoe. And the other group says, no, Messiah has given the sign, it's the water bottle. And then they have a split in religion. You have the water bottle lineage, and then you have the sandal lineage. And the poor guy is trying to run away from them because they're completely mad. And then he runs into the home of his mother. And they say, come out, Messiah, come out, Messiah. And then this point he's angry. He opens the shutters and he screams, I'm not Messiah. And they all say, every Messiah says he's not a Messiah. So this is the proof. And it goes on. And then his mom opens the door and he's like, he's not a Messiah, he's an idiot. But very often, they're making fun of human religiosity, because there's funny element to human mind, where people pick something without that person's or thing's consultation or approval and worship that person or that creature. I mean, in India, time flies. I was going to say a few years ago, but it's been like more than a decade, maybe even a couple of decades. There was a village in which they worshipped a dog. There was something special about the dog, so they worshipped the dog. And there's something special about the dog. And I personally have seen, did the dog ever agree to be worshipped? No. So this is going on. So these asuras, they were worshipping Varuna Devi. And also these deities, they will often give sort of shelter to these kind of otherwise lost people. And so this is point one. That Varuna Devi was worshipped by the asuras. Varuna is, by the way, worshipped not only by asuras, he worshipped by, and still is, by many other pious people. Like, for example, Zarathustra. He also was a devotee of, according to Rig Veda, and apparently this is also mentioned in their scripture, Zendavesta, that he was a devotee of Varuna Dev. Now, Varuna Dev also had another devotee, which is a famous Vedic sage, Vasishta Muni, very famous Vedic sage. And so what happened was that in one point there was a conflict between the two. This is described in the Rig Veda. There was a conflict between the two, between Zarathustra and Vasishta. And the conflict was over a nature of worship. The purpose, the reason, the goal of worship, and so on. And so Zarathustra was basically ostracized from Vedic society for having taught certain elements which were unacceptable within the Vedic paradigm. And that's when he made his journey to Iran, which is basically just a country over. Now, and it's interesting that in Zendavesta, the name of Vasishta was completely preserved like that. They did not change the name. So it's same Vasishta as mentioned in the Rig Veda and as well as Zendavesta. Now, when he made the journey to modern Persia, modern Iran, he started his movement. He started teaching his stuff. And started gaining following, which eventually grew into a major religion, to the major religion of the area. And now we'll point out few differences between what Zarathustra taught and the Vedic culture. The differences were, for example, stark dualism. Stark dualism. I, for example, grew up in a Catholic tradition. My parents were Catholic, my grandparents and their parents, and it goes way back. They're all Catholics. The whole country of Croatia is Catholic. 90-some%, they're all Catholics. And so I am very much aware of this stark dualism. What does this mean? What does stark dualism refers to? Stark dualism. For example, in not only in Christian religion, but in all these, I'll just call them Western religions, you find this dualism in several forms. One form is conflict between God and the devil. There is no such a thing in Vedic culture. Why do people come up with this idea that there's conflict between God and devil? Question to you. Does anyone know what theodicy is? She had her hand first. Let's see. What were we going to say?
You had asked why there was conflict between God and the devil?
Yeah, like why would people come up with that concept?
Well, in Western scriptures, that's the whole perception.
No, not in the Bible. I read the Bible very carefully.
Within, like Noah's Ark and why Eve ate the apple.
Correct, but there is no conflict between. There is conflict between God and the devil, but devil's in the Bible not painted as a rival of God. In other words, before God, devil has no significance. God can wipe out that fella, no sweat. Yet in Western traditions, by now, we find this dualism where God literally fights equally strong opponent, the devil. Does anyone know what theodicy is?
Otherwise, they cannot prove why we are
Oh,
suffering.
sorry, I forgot, Prabhuji, you wanted to say something. I
Yeah, I remember.
slipped
Yeah,
my
I want
mind.
to say that because of human psychology, to prove that one is good and one is bad, make it very graphic, and victory over bad makes victory over evil makes people hope.
Okay.
People hope.
Okay, well, that's giving a hint. It's not yet fully the answer, but thank you. You made some progress. What were you going to say?
Otherwise, we cannot prove why we are suffering here. So they
Correct. We cannot. When we suffer, when we see large human suffering, we ask ourselves, why is this happening? And then especially people who believe in God, they ask these questions, how can God approve of this? So many Jews became atheists after the Second World War because of the immense suffering of humanity. And so then basically the question is, why bad things happen to good people? And so some people give answer to this by saying that God has a contender. That God has a contender. This is how they answer this. I personally disagree with it for my own reasons. And definitely Vedic tradition disagrees with this. So this is one thing, stark dualism. So Zarathustra was teaching this, and this is one of the reasons why it was ostracized. He was teaching stark dualism. That there's this conflict between God and devil, and they're of equal strength. And then so when the good fellow is winning the God, right, then everything's good. Humans are kind of like puny low people who just are caught in between, right? So when the devil's winning, we all suffer, and when the God's winning, we're all good. Like that. That was the concept. And this stark dualism also teaches that there's a distinct origin of both. Now there's a distinct origin to God, and there's a distinct origin to devil. And you find this in polytheistic traditions. For those of you who like to study history of religion, you find this a lot in polytheism. That God battles, has origin, was born in one point, but is supreme, stronger than anyone else, but some or other a contender is also born, and then they fight, and then maybe sometimes the bad guy takes over. So there's this concept that Zarathustra also taught, that God and devil have unique origin, whereas in Vedic culture, there's origin is singular. That everything comes from God, knowledge and ignorance, good and bad, everything comes from God. Okay, let's see. Oh, the apocalypse or the judgment day. This is a big thing for Zarathustra. There's this apocalypse and there's this judgment day, and there'll be this horrible thing is going to happen. The whole world's gonna something horrible is going to happen to the world globally, like really nasty. And then that will be the judgment day. And then those who are pure, they'll make it through, and those who are not, they're going to be eternally condemned. This is very against Vedic worldview. Very, very against worldview. And we can discuss afterwards why. And that this judgment day is basically victory of God over the devil. And from that day on, only goodness will abound. And this goodness is going to be realized in the physical realm. Now, if you know anything about Asuras, to go back, Asuras, the worshippers of Varuna, that this is very much Asuric mentality. Asuric mentality is that I am going to realize my eternal happiness on the material plane. This is very much against Vedic concept. Vedic concept is that matter is temporary and is giving pain. And no matter what you do, no matter how many homeless people you feed, no matter how many hospitals you open, which is all good things to do, but problems will never cease in the material world. Prabhupada used to make a comment about Christian missionaries in India would feed the poor. Prabhupada said, after all these years of feeding the poor in India, I have not seen decrease in numbers of hungry people in India. Again, I'm not saying that we should be callous towards human or animal suffering or plant suffering or any kind of suffering, but the point is that the Vedas don't say that you will ever be able to realize eternal happiness on the material plane. As a matter of fact, Srila Prabhupada used to quote Chanakya Pandit that do not sacrifice permanent for the sake of temporary, because you will lose both. Temporary you cannot keep, that's for sure. But if you give up permanent for the sake of temporary, then you're a real fool. But that's exactly what the Suras do. Their very concept of spirituality is to realize physical happiness. And this is what Zarathustra taught. That there will be, when the God wins over the evil, then there will be resurrection, which is also speculation. And from that point on, the good will live forever in the material realm. Which, as a matter of fact, in Christian tradition was a huge point of confusion and contention, resurrection. Because first of all, there's nothing such in the Bible. If you read the Bible, there's one mention of something that seems like resurrection, but you can't really say. But some or other, in due course, within certain Christian communities, resurrection was accepted as a fact. And so even, what was his name? I think I noted his name down. Let me see. Saint Augustine. Saint Augustine, he was a very prominent figure in Christian tradition. He was asked this question. So, what does this mean? If resurrection is real, which means that the body that's been buried in the ground or eaten by animals, or even if you bury it, that's exactly what happens. It's not eaten by animals, but by worms and stuff. So all the particles of the body are completely disintegrated. But somehow that these particles will come together, and then the body will form again. Physical body. And this will be your eternal form. And you'll continue to live forever in this form. So then he was asked, what about people who die at the age of 2? What about people who died at the age of 80? Or with a leg missing? What about people who have physical imperfections? And then after speculating on this, he made the statement that they all have a body of a 30-year-old, like this. But you can see how this is very naive. This is very naive. So, but anyhow, this was one of the things Zarathustra was big on. I guess I'll first say this. First finish this list, then I'll make the last statement. In Zarathustra's concept of spirituality, material enjoyment was not only the standard of happiness, but it was a sign of mercy of God on the soul, on the individual. Like the individual who supposedly received the mercy of God ended up rich. Rich and opulent. And those of you who know some about certain spiritual communities in modern America, they literally teach this. That if you're poor means God doesn't like you. And so, they say that celibacy is a sin. Whereas in Vedic concept, to conserve energy, to remain celibate and use that energy in service of God is considered a very noble thing to do. Not only that, but if you can avoid getting entangled in material life through family, house and properties and so on, that much better you're off. That, attachment, unnecessary attachment to this world is binding you to this world. You don't belong to this world, you belong to the spiritual world. But in Zarathustra's concept, the material world is the world. There is no other world. And then in one point, if you're a good guy, the God will show His mercy to you by making you live, making it possible for you to live eternally in the material realm with your senses, so that you can selfishly sense gratify around. So celibacy is an offense, is sinful, and moksha or liberation is an offense. I remember once I was, not to mention the tradition with which this person was affiliated, but I was on my way to India and my spiritual teacher, he was writing a book and he had his editor who was editing the book. And his laptop fell apart, so he asked me, in those days laptops in America were so much more inexpensive than in India. You could, for a price of one computer in India, you could buy 5 over here. So he just needed like a very cheap laptop,